When you look at a map, you see these clean lines defining countries. But that's not how nations are really born, is it? They're forged in fire, in struggle, in debate, in massive transformation. And the story of modern India? Wow, it's one of the most epic examples you'll ever find. It's this incredible, century-long journey from just a collection of states to a single, unified, independent nation.
So that brings us to the big question, right? How is a modern nation actually born? That's what we're going to unpack here. We're going to trace that story step by step through a century of struggle, of reform, and ultimately of revolution that created the India we know today.
All right, so let's get into it. Our story kicks off back in the 19th century, and you've got these two huge, powerful forces shaping the subcontinent, happening at the exact same time. One was this incredible awakening from within, and the other, well, it was an arrival from the outside.
So on one side, you have this internal awakening. Think of it as this big push for social and religious reform, bubbling up from inside Indian society itself. But at the same time, you've got the external arrival. This is when European trading companies show up. And the big one, of course, was the British East India Company. And let me tell you, their ambitions went way, way beyond just selling tea and spices. And this internal awakening wasn't just some abstract idea. It had faces, it had leaders. The most prominent was probably Raja Ram Mohan Roy. People call him the father of the Indian Renaissance, and for good reason. This was a man who took a stand, campaigning against practices like sati and pushing hard for modern education. He was all about reforming society from the inside out.
Okay, so now let's flip over to that other force, the external one. Because while reformers like Roy were busy debating big ideas, the British East India Company was busy doing something else entirely. They were changing the actual map of India. Their whole business model was shifting, from just trading goods to taking outright control of territory.
And they had some pretty clever and, frankly, devious tools to do it. One of the big ones was called the Subsidiary Alliance. Now, on the surface, it sounds like a good deal, right? A protection deal, basically. Indian rulers would get British troops stationed in their territory, but they had to pay for them. But here's the catch, and it's a huge one. They weren't allowed to make any other alliances or declare war without British permission. It was a slow-motion takeover, stripping away their power, piece by painful piece.
And if that wasn't enough, then came the doctrine of lapse. This one was even more blatant. The rule was simple. If an Indian ruler died without a direct biological son to inherit the throne, poof, their kingdom was just absorbed, annexed by the British. That's how places like Jhansi and Satara were taken over. And as you can imagine, this caused an absolutely massive amount of anger and resentment. So let's just pause on that for a second. The crucial takeaway here is that by 1856, a private company, not a government, a company was in control of most of the Indian subcontinent. It's wild to think about. This incredibly fast, aggressive expansion, it was like winding a spring tighter and tighter. Something was bound to snap, and it was going to be big, and it was going to be violent. And snap it did. In 1857, that's when we see the Great Revolt. This was the first really big, widespread, coordinated armed uprising against British rule. It didn't just challenge them, it shook the very foundations of their power in India.
So what lit the fuse? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was a whole powder keg of issues. You had the political anger from things like the doctrine of lapse. You had economic problems from annexations like Awadh. But the final spark, the thing that set it all off, was the rumor about the new rifle cartridges. The story went that they were greased with pig and cow fat, which was deeply offensive to both Muslim and Hindu soldiers. That was the last straw.
And once it started, it just exploded. The rebellion spread like wildfire all across North and Central India. I mean, it began as a mutiny among soldiers, the sepoys, in early 1857. But it morphed, incredibly quickly, into this full-blown popular revolt. By that summer, you had huge brutal battles raging in major centers like Delhi, Kanpur, and Lucknow.
And this wasn't just an army rebellion. People from all walks of life and all corners of the country rose up. The leadership was incredibly diverse. You had figures like the absolutely iconic Rani Lakshmi Bai in Jhansi, leading this fierce resistance after her state was stolen from her.
Then over in Kanpur, you had Nana Sahib, who became a central rallying point for the rebels.
And even in Bihar, the elderly but totally formidable Kunwar Singh was leading the charge. The point is, these local heroes showed just how widespread this fight really was. It was a true multi-regional resistance.
Now, in the end, the revolt was brutally suppressed by the British. But It was a massive turning point. It was a wake-up call. The strategy of direct, armed conflict had failed, so a new idea began to take hold. Maybe the fight needed to shift from the battlefield to the political arena. People realized they needed a single, unified platform to make their case and voice their demands. And that platform, it arrived in 1885. It was called the Indian National Congress. And this was a huge deal, a total game changer. For the very first time, there was a national organization that could speak with a unified Indian voice directly to the British government. Now, at first, their goals were pretty modest. They were just looking for more representation, a few reforms. But almost immediately, a big debate broke out. How should they actually do this? On one side, you had the moderates. They believed in playing by the rules, writing petitions, making constitutional appeals. But then this new, more fiery group emerged, known as the extremists, and they were like, no, that's not going to work. They argued for getting the masses involved, for mobilization, and they started using a new word, Swaraj, self-rule. And you can literally watch this idea get more and more popular by tracking the big annual meetings of the Congress. The early ones, all about small administrative reforms. But then, fast forward to 1906 in Calcutta, and bam, the demand for Swaraj is officially on the table. This tension between the two groups just kept building until it finally boiled over in 1907, causing what's known as the Surat Split. The party literally broke apart for a while over this. So up to this point, the freedom struggle was mostly a thing for the educated, for the elites. But all of that was about to change. It was about to become a movement of the masses, of millions of ordinary people. And the person who was going to light that fire was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. And Gandhi brought a totally new weapon to the fight. At the very heart of his philosophy was this concept called satyagraha. It literally translates to truth force. And it was a revolutionary idea for political action, nonviolent civil disobedience. The plan was simple, but so powerful. You openly and peacefully break unjust laws, and you willingly, bravely accept the punishment. You fight injustice with truth, not with fists. And he didn't just talk about it, he put it into action right away. In a place called Champaran, he used it to stand with oppressed indigo farmers. In Ahmedabad, he used it to support striking factory workers. In Quetta, he used it to back peasants who were being crushed by taxes they couldn't pay. And here's the amazing part. He won. These early victories, all achieved without a single act of violence, proved to everyone that Satyagraha worked. It cemented him as a leader for the entire nation. Okay, so this just set the stage for the final epic phase of the struggle. The goalposts were about to move big time. No more talking about self-rule within the British Empire. The new demand was for nothing less than complete and total independence. The real point of no return happened in Lahore in 1929. The Congress passed a historic resolution demanding Purna Swaraj, complete independence. And to make this more than just words on a paper, to make it real for millions of people, they declared January 26th as India's Independence Day. It was this powerful, symbolic act of defiance, celebrated all across the country. And that declaration kicked off a series of massive, intense, nationwide movements. You had the civil disobedience movement, famously sparked by the Salt March in 1930, which got millions of people involved. Then, during World War II, the pressure cooker was turned up even higher. You had Subhash Chandra Bose forming the Indian National Army to fight the British, and back home, the launch of the Quit India movement in 1942. This was it, the final, massive, unambiguous demand for the British to just leave. And in 1947, they did. The British left. But think about that journey we just traced, from social reform and a corporate takeover to a violent rebellion, to political organizing, and finally to a mass movement based on nonviolence. That whole incredible story left a permanent mark on the nation. And that really leaves us with one final, big question to chew on. How do the echoes of that complex, century-long struggle for freedom still define the world's largest democracy today?